Good morning. Good morning. You know, you're probably the only church that really looks forward to the offering, because you never know what story David's going to tell. And you are an unusual church in another way, because you hired an interim pastor without ever hearing him preach. I don't know what adjective I would use to describe it. I'll use the word courageous. Okay? Thank you for being so courageous. It's nice that after 2 months of thinking about this and praying about this, it's finally here. And we have been enjoying Woodland Church campgrounds. The price is right, free water, free electricity, use of the kitchen, use of the bathroom. It's really great. And we've also been enjoying looking around the community a little bit. I don't know how many of you have been up to Mount Zion recently. That is a very beautiful place. We were so impressed. You know, Jerusalem has nothing over on Ironwood when it comes to Mount Zion. I want to get to know you a little bit. Last time we were here, we introduced ourselves a little bit. So I need to ask you some rather serious questions as we get started. How many of you are Packer fans? Okay. Are there any Lions fans in the crowd? One. Only one is going to admit it anyway. Other than Marine and me, are there any Viking fans? Oh. Ooh, all right.
Vikings.
We suffer along, don't we? It's nice to know what kind of a crowd you're dealing with. Seriously divided congregation. So I think we better pray before we get started. God, what a privilege it is to be here with your people. Something happens as we meet for worship that happens nowhere else, in no other way. We thank you that you are here through your Spirit. We have enjoyed singing praises to you, giving of our resources to you, laughing together, and now we gather around your word. Because my words are not important, it's only your words that are important. And so may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts together be acceptable and profitable and life-changing in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. You are looking at a man who grew up with a very serious disease. It was called glossophobia. Glossophobia is the fear of public speaking. And that started out for me very early. When I was 10 years old, I wanted to join the church. And one of the requirements, of course, was meeting with the deacons and giving your testimony. Well, I got through about 3 words before I broke down and started to cry. Fortunately, my father was a deacon, and so he gave my testimony to the rest of the deacon board. Fast forward a few years, I somehow became part of a youth leadership team, and we were sitting around the table, and just as I feared, they asked me what my opinion was. And all I could get out was a nosebleed. Fast forward to seminary. There was one thing I was never going to do, and that was to be involved in public speaking. I enjoyed languages, so I thought I'd be a Wycliffe Bible translator, go out to a jungle somewhere where I didn't have to be around a whole lot of people, and learn a language and translate the Bible into a new language. But somehow I found myself as an associate pastor at a predominantly African American congregation in downtown St. Paul. And one of the requirements was public speaking, preaching. And I remember the first Sunday that I stood up and preached to this congregation. It probably was the worst sermon that was ever preached on the face of the earth. But those African Americans, you know how they are when they hear a preacher. Preach it, brother, Pastor Curt, amen. And we went home, and Reed was sitting beside me in the car and said, I can't believe that was you. And I said, I can't believe it was me either. So God's will is mysterious and unpredictable. And here I am. And it's a humbling experience to ever stand before anyone and be able to get a few words out that are intelligible and meaningful. So when you say you're blessed that we're here, I want you to know that this doesn't have much to do with me. It has everything to do with God and His will and His call on our lives. We're going to look into the Word of God today, the Old Testament, from the book of Numbers, chapter 13. And we'll read verses 1 to 3 and then 17 through 33. The Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. So at the Lord's command, Moses sent them out from the desert of Paran. All of them were leaders of the Israelites. And then it goes on to name them. Shammua, Shaphat, Caleb, Issachar, Hoshea, which is Joshua, Palti, Gadai, Amiel, Sepher, Nabi, and Ewell. These are the names of the men Moses sent to explore the land. Then verse 17. When Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, go up through the Negev and up into the hill country, see what the land is like, and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees on it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. It was the season for the first ripe grapes. So they went up and explored the land from the desert of Zin as far as Rehob toward Lebo, Hamath. They went up through the Negev and came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, lived. Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. When they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut off there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But, the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites lived in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites had live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea along the Jordan. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak, come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Have you ever felt like a melanopus differentialis? How many of you have felt like that? One. How many of you have ever felt like a grasshopper about to be squished? Well, I rather imagine, even if you've forgotten your 9th grade biology, you at some time or another, like me, have felt pretty insignificant, like an insect, like a grasshopper. When I read this passage, I got all my Dr. Seuss synapses firing, and I wrote down some crazy words, and it came out like this. Have you ever felt small because you're not very tall? Maybe 5'2", and that's all? Well, join the crowd, but don't say it out loud. We're all too tiny to be proud. Consider the redwood's height and the eagle's flight, or Niagara's might, Grand Canyon so wide, and the ocean tide. Where can I hide? Then there's the universe, makes me feel worse. Light years away, call for a nurse. We all face giants like Israel of old, not too brave, not too bold. We're much like them, if the truth be told. Now the people of Israel have come out of slavery. They have followed Moses, and they have crossed the Red Sea on dry ground. They have watched Pharaoh's mighty army washed away by the hand of Almighty God. They've feasted on quail and manna that miraculously appeared every morning. A cloud has led them by day and a pillar of fire by night. And now they stand on the edge of the promised land. And they decide to check it out before they go in. So they send 12 men, one from each tribe, to spy out the land. Now, all agreed on certain facts, certain realities. They said it's indeed a productive, rich land. The people there are big. They're on steroids. It looks like they've been on HGH for a while. The cities have high walls. Must be the city planner had a military background. So they agreed on those things. But then there was a sharp division. And first the majority report. 10 out of 12, that's a little more than 83%, gave the overwhelming majority report. And they list a number of reasons that they can't do it. They're stronger, they're bigger, they devour, they're descendants of the giants. They have an all-star lineup of terrifying enemies, the Anakites, the Amalekites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites. And in comparison to them, we're pretty small. We're pretty insignificant. What can we say to that reality? And then Caleb speaks up. Caleb and Joshua, 2 out of 12. That's only 16.7%. Very tiny minority. And in 16 words, they say this: we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. And we ask the question, why the great difference? As far as we can tell, They all were of equal intelligence, more or less. They all had the same eyesight. They went to the same places and saw the same things. Why the great difference? Well, you could say, well, it must be the 10 were pessimists. They saw a problem in every possibility. And the 2 were optimists. They saw a possibility in every problem. And you could say that the difference is in attitude and perspective. I remember Kenny Rogers, a little song about a little boy with a baseball bat. I don't know if any of you remember. Little boy in a baseball hat stands in the field with his ball and bat, says, "I am the greatest player of them all." Puts his bat on his shoulder and tosses up the ball, and the ball goes up and the ball comes down. He swings his bat all the way around, and the world's so still you can hear the sound as the baseball falls to the ground. Now the little boy doesn't say a word, picks up his ball, he is undeterred, says, "I am the greatest there has ever been," and he grits his teeth and tries it again. And the ball goes up and the ball comes down. He swings his bat all the way around, and the world's so still you can hear the sound as the baseball falls to the ground. He makes no excuses. He shows no fear. He just closes his eyes and listens to the cheers. Little boy, he adjusts his hat, picks up his ball, stares at his bat, and says, "I am the greatest. The game is on the line," and he gives his all one last time. And the ball goes up like the moon so bright, swings his bat with all his might, and the world's as still can be, and the baseball falls, and that's strike 3. Now it's supper time, and his mama calls. Little boy starts home with his bat and ball, says, "I am the greatest, that is a fact. But even I didn't know I could pitch like that." Says, "I am the greatest, that is understood. But even I didn't know I could pitch like that." Now that's an optimist if there ever was one. Let's go a little deeper into the last verse of chapter 13 and see if we can extract some insights concerning how the 10 reached their desperate, depressing conclusion. So we're going to talk about 3 ways they missed the promised land, 3 ways we can miss the promises of God. Number 1 way is to trust your own view of yourself. It says, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes." That was their view of themselves. Our own view of ourselves is almost always wrong. We're either too inflated and proud, or we're too insignificant and puny. You know, the last 40 years, our country has been obsessed with our view of ourselves. You know, our past, our issues, our secrets. If I see one more selfie on Facebook, I'm going to throw up. We emphasize our self-image rather than our God image. Notice that the majority says we, they. The minority report says the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. That's the difference in their perspective. With eyes on ourselves, our challenges and our obstacles look like giants. But with our eyes on God, our obstacles become the very opportunities that God can use to show His power and His glory. Proverbs 3, 5 and 6, Marie's favorite verses. Say, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart," and then the next phrase, "and lean not on your own understanding." How often, rather than trust the Lord, we depend and we give great credence to our own understanding. in 2 Corinthians, you remember he had a thorn in the flesh, some big obstacle that he dealt with all his life. And this is how he dealt with it. But he, that is God, said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So the first way we can miss the promises of God is to trust our own view of ourselves. Secondly, another way to miss the promised land is to trust others' view of yourself. Notice what it says. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. So they have this lousy estimate of themselves, and they believe that those who are looking at them have the same opinion. You may be interested, actually, to find out what the Canaanites' view of the Israelites really was. If we turn over to Joshua chapter 2, you remember later on, some more spies went in and checked out the land, and they meet this prostitute named Rahab, and she hides them from their enemies. And it says this, before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Isn't that amazing? That here, the enemies of the Israelites felt like grasshoppers, and they melted with fear before the God of the Israelites. And here, a pagan prostitute had a higher view of God than God's own people had of themselves and of their God. How do we know what others really think of us? You know, outwardly they may scoff, they may mock, they may ignore us, but deep down, maybe something else is going on when they watch our lives. So we can miss the promised land by trusting our own view of ourselves or others' view of ourselves. The third and most tragic way is to fail to trust God's view of yourself. Notice in chapter 13, verse 1, God says, the land which I am giving to them, it was a done deal. And in the New Testament, further, we read of God's opinion of us. It says in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9, 10, and 12, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Fear is rebellion against God. And the opposite of fear is faith. And my definition of faith is trusting God no matter what. That's a simple definition of faith that I find that rings true in all of Scripture. Trusting God no matter what. Does anybody remember the name Shammua, Paltai, Amiel, and Nabi? part of the majority report. But we remember Joshua and Caleb because they had a vision. If you go over to chapter 14 of Numbers in verse 9, this is what Caleb says to the Israelite people. Verse 9, chapter 14, verse 9. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will swallow them up. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. And then in verse 24, the Lord tells the Israelites what he thinks of Caleb. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit. Joshua and Caleb had a vision. They had a different spirit than the majority. They believed God's promise was real, that God's presence made all the difference, that God's power was enough, and that his plan would be fulfilled. You may remember the heroes of faith from Hebrews chapter 11. And it says at the end of that chapter that these heroes of the faith didn't always receive the promise. Some of them died and were killed and persecuted. They didn't experience the promise that they clung to. They saw them from afar. And it was that vision that kept them going. Florence Chadwick